When Mark discovers a cryptic message on his wife Laura's phone, his world collapses. The betrayal he unravels shatters their 10-year marriage, leaving him grappling with heartbreak, anger, and the need for answers. Determined to reclaim his dignity, Mark confronts Laura, igniting a storm of regret and emotional turmoil. As Laura pleads for forgiveness, Mark faces the agonizing decision of whether to mend what's broken or walk away forever. But just as he begins to rebuild his life, an unexpected plea from Laura sets off a chain of events that spirals into tragedy. In a story of love, betrayal, and devastating consequences, Mark learns that even the strongest resolve can't shield the heart from loss. This gripping, emotional journey will leave you questioning the fragility of trust and the depths of forgiveness. The rain pounded against the windows as I sat on the living room couch, staring blankly at the muted television. Laura was supposed to be home an hour ago. She had texted me earlier, apologizing for being late, and said her work meeting had run over. I wanted to believe her. After all, we'd built a life together. Trust wasn't supposed to be optional. But tonight felt different. It started small, as most things do. A nagging feeling in the back of my mind, a sense that something was off. Laura had been distracted lately. She spent more time on her phone, laughed at jokes I hadn't heard, and seemed distant even when she was sitting right next to me. I brushed it off as stress. Her job in marketing was demanding, and she'd mentioned that her company was onboarding a new client. I told myself it was just work, that I was overthinking things. Until tonight. The text came at exactly 8:14 p.m. as I was putting away the leftovers from dinner. Running late. Don't wait up. Love you. It should have reassured me. It didn't. The rain continued to hammer against the house as I stood in the kitchen, staring at my phone. The words felt hollow, robotic. Laura's messages were always full of little details, what she was working on, who she was meeting with, when she expected to be home. But this one lacked all of that. It was a placeholder, a message designed to occupy space without revealing anything. Then her phone buzzed. It was on the counter, just a few feet away from me. She'd forgotten it in her rush to leave, an unusual slip for someone as meticulous as Laura. I wasn't the type to snoop. I'd always believed that privacy was essential, even in a marriage. But something about the way it lit up, casting a pale glow on the marble countertop, pulled me toward it. The message preview read, "Can't wait to see you again, gorgeous. Let's make it unforgettable." My heart stopped. The sender's name was Tony Jim, but I knew immediately that wasn't a trainer or a gym buddy. Laura hadn't set foot in a gym in over 6 months. The blood drained from my face as I stared at the screen, the words searing themselves into my brain. 1,000 thoughts swirled in my head, denial, anger, confusion. I wanted to believe there was some innocent explanation, but deep down, I knew there wasn't. I didn't open the message. I didn't need to. The preview alone was enough to confirm what I'd been too blind to see for weeks, maybe months. Laura was cheating on me. For a while, I just stood there, paralyzed. The rain outside mirrored the storm brewing in my chest. I felt betrayed, humiliated, furious. But more than anything, I felt small. Like a fool who had been played while the world watched and laughed. I put her phone down carefully, as though it were a bomb that might detonate if handled too roughly. My hands shook as I walked back to the couch and sat down. My mind raced, replaying every moment over the past few months, searching for signs I'd missed. The late nights, the sudden disinterest in spending time together, the way she smiled at her phone more than she smiled at me. I should have confronted her right then. I should have called her, demanded answers, told her I knew. But I didn't. Instead, I waited. I needed more than a single message. If I was going to face her, I wanted to have all the facts. I didn't want to give her the chance to lie her way out of it. So I waited. When Laura finally came home, it was almost midnight. She walked through the door, shaking the rain off her coat and smiling like nothing had happened. "Hey, sorry I'm so late," she said, setting her bag down on the kitchen table. "Work was a nightmare tonight." I forced a smile, my stomach churning. "No problem," I said casually. "Did you eat?" "Yeah, they brought in takeout for the meeting," she replied, her voice light and breezy. She kissed me on the cheek as she walked past, the smell of her perfume lingering in the air. It was the same perfume she wore on our wedding day. The thought made me sick. I watched her climb the stairs to our bedroom, her steps light and unhurried. She had no idea what I'd seen. No idea that her secret was no longer safe. I waited until I heard the shower running before I picked up her phone again. This time, I opened the message. The full text was even worse than I'd imagined. "Can't wait to see you again, gorgeous. Let's make it unforgettable. Tonight was amazing, I can still feel your touch." I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. The words blurred as tears welled up in my eyes, but I blinked them away. I couldn't let myself break down, not yet. There was work to do. I spent the next 2 hours digging through her phone, finding every message, every photo, every clue that would tell me the truth. I pieced together a timeline of her betrayal, reconstructing the nights she'd been working late, and the weekends she'd been visiting her mom. It all fit together too perfectly, like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to solve. When I was done, I put her phone back on the counter and went to bed. Laura was already asleep, her breathing soft and even. I lay down beside her, staring at the ceiling, wondering how I'd let things get to this point. How I'd let myself believe in a love that wasn't real. But I didn't feel hopeless. Not entirely. Because now, I had a plan. The next morning came too quickly. The faint light of dawn seeped through the curtains, casting pale shadows on the walls of our bedroom. Laura stirred beside me, her soft breaths breaking the silence. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, trying to quiet the storm of thoughts raging in my mind. Her betrayal had felt like a knife to the chest, but now the pain had begun to harden into something else, resolve. When Laura finally woke, she stretched and smiled at me. It was a smile I had once cherished, but now it only filled me with bitterness. "Morning," she said sleepily, brushing her hair from her face. "Morning," I replied, keeping my voice even. I didn't trust myself to say more. She kissed my cheek and slipped out of bed, humming softly as she disappeared into the bathroom. I waited until I heard the water running before I got up and went downstairs. Her phone was still on the counter, exactly where I had left it. For a moment, I debated whether to take another look, but I already had all the proof I needed. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring out at the rain-soaked street. My mind raced through possibilities. Should I confront her now? Should I wait? Should I tell her everything I knew, or let her lie to my face one last time just to see how far she'd go? None of the options felt satisfying, but I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going to let her off easy. When Laura came downstairs, she was dressed for work, her hair damp from the shower. She poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, scrolling through her phone. "Big day today," she said casually. "I've got back-to-back meetings. Probably won't be home until late." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. "That's fine," I said. "I'll handle dinner." She smiled. "Thanks, babe. You're the best." The words felt like salt in an open wound. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her I knew everything, but I held back. Not yet. After she left, I spent the rest of the morning combing through our shared life, looking for more pieces of the puzzle. I checked our bank accounts, credit card statements, and even the locations of her recent purchases. Each discovery was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. Dinner at fancy restaurants I'd never heard of, hotel bookings in the middle of the week, and charges for gifts that certainly weren't for me. It all painted a clear picture of a life she'd been living behind my back. By the time the afternoon rolled around, I had compiled a file thick enough to rival an FBI dossier. But I didn't stop there. If I was going to confront Laura, I wanted to be prepared for every possible outcome. I made an appointment with a lawyer and started researching our state's divorce laws. I wasn't going to be blindsided when the time came. I also began thinking about what I wanted from all of this. Did I want revenge? Justice? Closure? The truth was, I wasn't sure. All I knew was that I couldn't let Laura walk away from this unscathed. She had taken our marriage, our trust, and turned it into a lie. She had to face the consequences. That evening, Laura came home just as the sun was setting. She walked through the door with the same breezy confidence she always had, completely unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. "Hey," she said, setting her bag down. "Sorry I'm late. Traffic was awful." "No problem," I said, forcing a smile. "Dinner's ready." Her face lit up. "You're the best. What did I do to deserve you?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and gestured for her to sit down. "Let's eat." Dinner was a quiet affair. Laura chatted about her day, oblivious to the tension in the air. I nodded along, letting her words wash over me without really hearing them. My mind was elsewhere, planning my next move. When we were finished, she stood and began clearing the table. "I'm going to take a shower," she said. "Long day." "Take your time," I replied, watching her as she disappeared up the stairs. As soon as I heard the water running, I sprang into action. I retrieved the file I had compiled earlier and placed it on the coffee table in the living room. Then I sat down and waited. When Laura came back downstairs, her hair wrapped in a towel, she stopped in her tracks at the sight of the file. "What's this?" she asked, her voice cautious. I gestured for her to sit. "We need to talk." Her eyes darted between me and the file, suspicion creeping into her expression. Slowly, she sat down across from me. "What's going on?" I leaned forward, meeting her gaze. "I know, Laura. I know everything." For a moment, she didn't move. Then she laughed nervously, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "What are you talking about?" I opened the file and slid it across the table. "This. Your texts, your hotel stays, your dinners with Tony. It's all here." Her face went pale. "You went through my phone. That's what you're worried about?" I shot back. "Not the fact that you've been cheating on me." She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The room was silent except for the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Finally, she lowered her gaze, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Sorry?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You're sorry? Do you have any idea what you've done? You've destroyed everything we had." "I didn't mean to." "Don't," I interrupted. "Don't you dare try to excuse this. You made a choice, Laura. A choice to betray me, to lie to me, to throw away our marriage." She started to cry, her tears falling silently onto the table. But I felt no sympathy. "Not yet." I wasn't finished. "You don't get to play the victim here," I said coldly. "This is on you." Laura looked up at me, her eyes red and puffy. "Please," she begged. "Give me a chance to fix this." I shook my head. "You don't get to decide that anymore." As her tears fell, I stood and walked away, leaving her alone in the living room. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The anger and betrayal burned too brightly, and I knew that if I stayed, I might say something I couldn't take back. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But for tonight, I needed space. Time to think. Time to breathe. Laura's world was about to come crashing down, and I wasn't going to lift a finger to stop it. The next morning was eerily quiet. Laura and I moved through the house like strangers, careful to avoid crossing paths. She had barely spoken a word since our confrontation the night before, and I wasn't in the mood to break the silence. Her tears had done nothing to soften my anger. If anything, they had only made it harder to be in the same room with her. I spent the morning in my home office, sifting through paperwork and finalizing my plans. The lawyer I had spoken to the day before had been clear: I needed to gather all the financial documents I could find and prepare for a potential battle. Laura might have been the one who broke our vows, but that didn't mean she wouldn't fight to keep her share of everything we'd built together. By the time I emerged from the office, Laura was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring out the window. She looked up when I entered, her eyes puffy from crying. "We need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to keep the wall between us firmly in place. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the woman I had fallen in love with, wanted answers. "Fine," I said, sitting down across from her. "Talk." She took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she set her cup down. "I'm sorry, Mark. I know I've hurt you, and I'll never be able to undo what I've done. But I need you to understand, it wasn't about you." I scoffed. "It wasn't about me? That's supposed to make me feel better." She shook her head, her gaze dropping to the table. "I'm not saying it excuses what I did. I'm just trying to explain. I've been lost for a long time. I didn't know how to tell you, so I buried it. And then Tony came along, and he made me feel seen." "Seen?" I snapped. "I've been here, Laura. I've been here every single day, working to give us a life, a future. Don't tell me you weren't seen." "I know," she whispered, tears welling up in her eyes again. "I know you've been here, and I'm grateful for everything you've done. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling like myself. It's not your fault, Mark. It's mine." Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I wanted to lash out, to tell her that her excuses didn't matter. But part of me couldn't help but wonder if there was some truth in what she was saying. Had I missed the signs? Had I been so focused on building a life for us that I had overlooked her struggles? "I can't do this anymore," I said finally, my voice tight with emotion. "I can't keep pretending that we're okay. You've broken something that can't be fixed." She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "Mark, please. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make this right. Therapy, counseling, whatever you want. Just, don't give up on us." I stared at her, my mind racing. Could I forgive her? Could I find a way to move past this and rebuild what we had? The answer came to me as clearly as the rain tapping against the window. "No," I said, standing up. "I won't stay in a marriage built on lies. I deserve better than this." Her face crumpled, and she buried her head in her hands, sobbing. I turned away, unable to watch her break down. My decision was final, and no amount of tears or apologies would change that. The next few days were a blur of meetings with lawyers, packing boxes, and dividing assets. Laura stayed in the house while I moved into a small apartment downtown, needing space to clear my head and focus on what came next. The nights were the hardest, the silence of my new place amplifying the emptiness I felt. I threw myself into work, taking on extra projects and spending long hours at the office. It was easier than sitting alone, replaying the events of the past few weeks in my mind. But no matter how hard I tried to distract myself, the pain lingered. One evening, as I was unpacking a box of books in my new apartment, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Laura. "Can we talk? Just once more." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to leave her words unanswered. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the good times, the laughter and love we had shared, wanted closure. Fine, I typed back. Tomorrow at noon. The coffee shop on Main. The next day, I arrived at the coffee shop a few minutes early. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and the hum of conversation surrounded me. I chose a table near the window, my hands wrapped around a steaming mug as I waited for Laura to arrive. When she walked in, she looked pale and tired, her shoulders hunched as though the weight of the world was pressing down on her. She spotted me and made her way over, sitting down across from me without a word. "Thank you for meeting me," she said after a moment, her voice soft. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she continued. "About us, about what I did, about why I did it. And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I wanted to tell you. I'm sorry. Truly." Her words were sincere, but they did little to ease the ache in my chest. "You didn't just hurt me, Laura," I said, my voice cold. "You destroyed everything we built together. You can't undo that with an apology." "I know," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. I needed you to know that I'll regret this for the rest of my life." I stared at her, searching for some trace of the woman I had loved. But all I saw was a stranger, someone who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. "This is the end, Laura," I said firmly. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. But I can't be a part of it anymore." She nodded, her tears spilling over as she stood and walked away, leaving me alone at the table. I watched her go, a sense of finality settling over me. It was over. Truly over. And as painful as it was, I knew it was the right choice. The weeks after my final conversation with Laura were a haze. The divorce process was grueling, but straightforward. I focused on moving forward, building a life outside the shadow of betrayal. Yet, no matter how hard I tried, there was always a lingering void, an emptiness that refused to leave. I told myself I was better off alone. Trusting someone again seemed impossible. My friends encouraged me to go out, to meet new people, but I wasn't ready. Most nights, I stayed in my apartment, reading or working late, the silence of the place my only company. Life became a routine, safe, predictable, and numb. One Friday evening, I received an unexpected call. It was Laura's sister, Marcy. We had always been friendly, but since the separation, we hadn't spoken. Her voice trembled on the other end of the line. "Mark," she said, her words rushed and frantic. "Have you seen Laura?" "No," I replied, confused. "Why would I?" She's been struggling, Mark. A lot more than we realized. She's not answering her phone, and no one's heard from her in 2 days." I sighed, the familiar bitterness rising in my chest. "Marcy, I'm not her keeper anymore. Whatever she's going through is." "She left a note, Mark," Marcy interrupted, her voice breaking. "Your name was on it." The room spun. "What do you mean? What note?" Marcy's sobs on the other end of the line sent chills down my spine. She said she couldn't live with the guilt anymore. That she ruined everything she loved. And that, she was sorry. I stood frozen, the phone pressed to my ear. "Where is she?" "We don't know. The police are looking, but," Marcy's voice cracked. "She mentioned the bridge near downtown." My heart raced. I grabbed my keys and ran out the door, barely hearing Marcy's pleas to wait for the authorities. The rain poured as I drove, blurring the city lights into streaks of color. My mind raced through memories of Laura, of the life we had shared and the pain that had torn us apart. I had told myself I didn't care anymore, that her choices had absolved me of any responsibility. But now, the thought of her being gone forever filled me with a fear I couldn't shake. When I arrived at the bridge, the scene was chaos. Police cars with flashing lights lined the road, their beams cutting through the darkness. I parked and ran toward the crowd of officers and onlookers, my heart pounding in my chest. "Laura!" I shouted, pushing through the throng. "Where is she?" An officer stepped in front of me, his hand raised to stop me. "Sir, you need to stay back." "Please," I begged. "She's my wife. Tell me she's okay." The officer's face softened, but his silence was answer enough. He gestured toward the edge of the bridge, where a figure in a soaked coat stood precariously on the ledge, her back to the crowd. It was Laura. "Laura!" I yelled, my voice cutting through the rain. She turned slightly, her face pale and streaked with tears. For a moment, our eyes met, and I saw the depth of her pain, the weight of her regret. "Mark," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Laura, please," I said, stepping closer. "You don't have to do this. We can fix this. Whatever you're feeling, we can get through it." She shook her head, her body trembling. "I can't undo what I've done. I've lost everything. You, us. I can't live with myself." Tears blurred my vision as I reached out a hand. "Laura, you're not alone. Please, just take my hand." For a moment, it seemed like she might. Her gaze softened, and she moved slightly toward me. But then, something shifted in her expression, a flicker of resignation, a moment of finality. "I love you, Mark," she said, her voice breaking. Before I could react, she stepped back. Time slowed as I watched her fall, her figure swallowed by the darkness below. A scream tore from my throat, but it was drowned out by the sound of the rushing water. I ran to the edge, desperate to see her, to reach her, but the river was black and unyielding. The officers rushed past me, their voices urgent as they called for search teams and spotlights. But I knew, deep down, that it was too late. I fell to my knees, the rain soaking through my clothes, my heart shattering into a million pieces. She was gone. The woman I had loved, the woman who had betrayed me, the woman who had once been my whole world, gone. In the days that followed, they found her body downstream. The funeral was small, attended by her family and a handful of close friends. I stood at the back, unable to bring myself to speak, to say goodbye. The guilt weighed on me like a stone, crushing and relentless. Could I have done more? Should I have forgiven her? Was my anger worth her life? I would never know the answers. All I had left were memories, beautiful, painful, and haunting. In the end, her betrayal had broken both of us, leaving behind nothing but regret. And as I stood by her grave, the rain falling softly around me, I whispered the words I hadn't been able to say when it mattered most: "I forgive you."